Everyone. Just a reminder before we get going, our GCA forum will be recorded and publicly posted on our YouTube channel. Links to the recording and past recordings, as well as the slide decks, are available on our GCA forum webpage. All right, welcome to our Winter 2021 GCA forum. I'm Austin, I'm a grant analyst at GCA. My teammates and I have prepared a lot of material for the next hour. We'll break for questions after each topic, but please feel free to ask us questions at any point by using the Zoom chat feature. To kick us off, Azalea will be talking about duplicate requests.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Azalea, and I would like to talk to you today about the duplicate requests. So next slide, please. So what exactly is a duplicate request? So how we define duplicate request is it's the same request that goes into GCA help via one more intake system. So there are 3 intake systems into GCA help. As you know, there's GCA help email, there's grant tracker, and for right now we have voicemail. Otherwise you'd be able to call us if we were back in the office. And so what happens with the voicemails, we have it set up to where a copy of your message gets automatically sent to our email. So with the transition to work from home last year, we've noticed higher volumes in both email and grant tracker, as those have become the main form of communication for everybody. In the month of January, our average number of emails received on a daily basis was 144. And for grant tracker, it was about 84 inquiries a day. So that's quite a bit. Next slide, please. So how does the GCA help desk work? So I don't think we've ever gone through how work is triaged when it comes to GCA help. So I'm going to go over that now. So there's 5 grant analysts who manage the help desk. There's Austin, there's myself, Liz, Michelle, and Susan. And then of course we have our awesome boss, Cheryl Haycox. So emails and voicemails are a free-for-all. And so what that means is that everyone is pretty much in GCA help all day. And we're frequently checking it. We're looking for responses back from folks, and we're also looking for new things to work on. And so as they come in, we see something. If it wasn't something that has been claimed, we'll go ahead and put our name on it. So we self-assign and we start working on it.
And ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound. You are in the meeting now. There are more than 120 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. So keeping on. So grant tracker requests, that's a little different. It's not going to be a free for all. So topics are assigned to a specific GA for 1 quarter. So sometimes that's why you're always getting us. For a couple of months, you're probably like, why am I always getting this person? And then after 3 months, we rotate. But if someone's out or if there's an unusually large volume in a topic, we'll all jump in. So you'll see us in there as well. All right. So what happens when a duplicate request is sent? So I'm going to go over a very classic example of a duplicate request we actually see almost all the time. So we send out our invoice or report, and the sponsor will come back and they will say that they're rejecting the invoice because they found some unallowable expenditures and they want us to fix the invoice and resubmit. So this rejection notice is sent to GCA help because that's what's on the invoice to send inquiries to. And then also the sponsor will probably add the contact for the award, most likely the PI. So that email goes to GCA help. And let's just say Liz is in email at that moment. And she sees it. She's like, oh, okay, I'm going to start working on this. And so, she's going back and forth in this email with the sponsor. PI knows what's going on. And then she routes a request over to our invoicing team so they can work with the department to redo the invoice. All right, next slide. But the PI, being very well-intentioned and well-meaning, also sends a copy of the email to their administrative staff so they know what's going on. The administrative staff don't know that the conversation is still going on the email. So what they do is they'll send a grant tracker under the invoicing topic, letting us know that the invoice has been rejected. So invoicing, happens to be Michelle's topic for that quarter. And so she sees the grant tracker, she starts working on it, works with the administrator, she knows what to do, and then she routes a request to the invoicing team for processing. All right, next slide. So at this point, the invoicing team now receives 2 identical requests. And each is assigned to a different person, because what happens is Liz, when she routes hers, will get one number. Michelle, maybe an hour later, she does hers, it'll get a completely different number. And so we can't really sort through that and realize that there's, identical requests. And so the manager sees it and assigns it to, somebody. And so now you've got 2 people in the invoicing team working on the request. Eventually, though, it does get discovered. But by that time, you've already got duplication of efforts by both the grant analyst team and the invoicing team, and then resources have been tied up when they could have been used to process some other requests. Another thing I do want to point out too is, depending on the topic a grant analyst is assigned to, it could be very heavy. So for example, invoicing is one of our most heaviest topics. And so that person who's assigned to it may not be able to go over to the GCA help email very often, because sometimes we will catch like, wait a minute, I just saw a grant tracker about this, and then we'll be able to hijack that email, and so that way there won't be any duplicate requests. But sometimes it can be very hard, so please do keep that in mind. Okay, so here are my suggestions for best practices for contacting GCA help. So if possible, pick one intake system and stick with it. So, if you like Grant Tracker, please go with that. If you like email, please go with that. Because that really helps make sure that more than one GA isn't working on the same item. And if you need to send your request through 2 different intake systems, please call it out. And I have a really great example of something that happened. There was a request for an urgent invoice. The department contact sent a grant tracker early in the morning, but also sent a voicemail. And in this voicemail, they specifically said, I just sent a grant tracker about an urgent invoice. I really need some help on this. And so that was really great, because I happened to check that voicemail and I knew right away, oh, it's in my topic. And so I was able to grab it, work on it immediately, and get that invoice out in a couple of hours. And so in that case, I understand why it was sent twice, but please call it out, because that really helps us out. And if you do have to use 2 different intake systems, for example, maybe it starts in Grant Tracker, but we have to involve other people, or we have to contact the sponsor, so it jumps into email. Make sure that you reference the grant analyst that you've been working with. I mean, sometimes you'll notice that when we send you a grant tracker, we'll say, hey, can you send a copy of that sponsor email? Because sometimes people don't like to just attach it to Grant Tracker. They also want us to maybe respond on that same email. And if you put attention to, everyone will know, hey, that's for that specific GA, hands off. So again, if you do have to use more than one intake system, please reference that grant analyst you've been working with, so we can better help triage and let them know, hey, you just got this email, and they'll be able to jump in and start working on that. All right, next slide. So any questions?
We do have one in the chat that says, what about a ticketing system like ServiceNow?
So we have looked into some ticketing systems. They didn't always really work for us, and so that could be something that we can explore. But right now, the best thing is please don't send duplicate requests if possible. All right, is there any other questions?
That's all that was in the chat.
All right, thank you guys.
Oh, actually, there was one more question that just came in. Have you communicated this to PIs?
Have we communicated to PIs? So I mean, we're hoping that the PIs tune into our forum. I know that's not always the case, and so we're really hoping that you guys can work with us and maybe tell your PIs to maybe either go through you as the main source to contact GCA, or just make sure if they can include everyone if possible. I know it's hard. I know it didn't always happen as much when we were back in the office, but now that with email and Grant Tracker being the main communication and people working so far away from each other, I think it is hard to kind of coordinate. And so I think that's why we're seeing the spike in duplicate requests. So sometimes we'll call it out too when we're doing the responses. It's like, please only please reference us, or please only go through email. Yeah, we're kind of hoping you'll work with us and also help the PIs realize that they should only send one email or one grant tracker if possible. Right.
All right, so I'm Austin again, and I'll be talking about mid-year training grant reconciliation. So next month, GCA will be doing a mid-year training grant reconciliation. We tried this out last year, and it proved to alleviate issues later down the road when it came time to complete the final financial report. Beyond our mid-year reconciliation, early review of trainee stipend payments is highly recommended. Depending on the situation, corrections can be timely, so getting a head start will reduce the risk of a late report submission. What we'll do is review the appointments and term notices and trainee stipends posted in MyFD through the end of January. We'll be looking for over or under payments, as well as the correct use of object codes, and we will communicate any errors found via Grant Tracker. What we need from your department is to review any communication from GCA and respond if we've identified errors. Also, you'll need to make the necessary corrections, which may involve working with the ISC on under or over payments. Sometimes these corrections can take a while, so we recommend an early start on the process, again, to reduce the risk of a late FFR. I've included some additional resources here. Again, these slides will be posted to our webpage, so if you need to reference some of these resources, you can do so at a later date. Any questions?
Nothing's come in the chat.
Okay. So next is Cheryl, who will be going over some cash tips and tricks.
Hey guys, I'm Cheryl, and I'm ready for the next slide. So we just wanted to kind of throw some stuff out because we know that things are just nothing's the same as it was a year ago, right? So kind of one of the questions that comes up to us a lot is, how do I get a payment to you guys? It's here in my office, or I'm instructing a sponsor to send a payment. And so what we found is the best way is to instruct people to use our lockbox. One thing we noticed is that folks are trying to send maybe using FedEx or an overnight service. And the thing that's kind of funny is that the lockbox is this huge complex with, they don't have like a receptionist or people in there. It's just a crazy place, but you could probably have better service just by regular US mail to Chicago, which is kind of purposefully selected because it's in the middle of the country. In case anybody was wondering why the University of Washington would have a lockbox in Chicago, Illinois. That really is probably the very best place to get a payment to. If a sponsor asks, that's kind of what we would say. If you're preparing an invoice on like a clinical trial and they don't pay by ACH, have them send the check to this address. you can deliver checks to GCA. We do have very skeletal staff up there. Not that they're skeletons, but I think banking and accounting also has like, they'll each have maybe each department kind of has one person in the office trying to do this. And so things are a little slower than normal. And I've included a link, just kind of general how to get stuff to where it needs to go. In the next slide. So the next part is like the biggest, like the next big thing, which is how to make sure that your payment gets applied properly. And so the key is if you deliver the check to us or you're mailing it to the lockbox, write the budget number on the check. That helps the team find and apply the check properly. If, which I did already say, but if you are sending an invoice out yourself, which does happen like for clinical trials and things like that, just say, please reference, and then you can, reference the budget number, because that's the thing that links us all together. And then if people are sending a wire or an ACH payment, we do pay extra to get a little extra. You can include a little message, and a lot of the sponsors will send, this payment goes towards this budget number, or they'll give us a clue as to where that goes. And the third thing is if the payment is on the way, or it's here because you're monitoring banking and accounting, you can send us a grant tracker. And I've included right below there an excellent example. This department does this. They watch for their payments, and they tell us, they identify this payment happens to be an ACH payment, but they've given us like everything we need to know. Grant tracker, as you know, is linked to the budget number, so they don't even have to say it, but they did. They identified the ACH payment. And so our cash team is able to pop right on in there, grab that payment and put it on the right budget. So that's like the best. All right, next. The next thing is sort of a similar situation, which is you have a credit, but it's a refund from a vendor or a situation like that. And so the thing to remember on that is that it's offsetting an expense. So it can't go to revenue. It has to go against that same object code. And we do see from time to time where credits are being posted to revenue. And what that ends up doing is throwing the award and revenue off. And what should be used is the cash transmittal process. And on the cash transmittal form is a spot for the object code. And that's where you would put 0362 or something there. If you leave it blank, I do believe it tries to go to revenue as a default. And so for my own personal, I think of this like a credit card purchase. Like if I bought something and then I return that thing, I don't need my credit line increased. I need my balance reduced. And so that's kind of like how I think of this. And so sometimes that helps. And so that's why the object code is so important. The next one. So I have found an example of where a payment is posted. So you can see on that little top portion, this payment of $12,643 was applied to revenue. And the impact of having that applied there is you can see right below that, I did a screenshot from Grant Tracker, and the award says $882,292, which is what we were given, but the revenue part is increased, and so these two don't balance. And the difference is exactly the $12,643.20. So that's just an example. Sometimes if you see that, let us know. We can help get that fixed. Next. So if you do have if you're looking for a payment, this is a plug for our partners, banking and accounting operations. They are the source, man. They have basically they know all the money. They can look at all the accounts within the UW, or most of them, I should say. They have an unclaimed payment list. So this is a little screenshot. On the right-hand side is their website. And then kind of on the left side is they have a list, and you can sort it by payment amount, or by date or description, and you can search it. So like if you, in that prior example, you could search for Icon or, you know, whoever your sponsor is. And if you see something in there, you definitely want to let us know if it's a payment for a grant or belonging to a grant or contract. You can let us know, and that helps us. We can grab it and apply it once we have all the information. The next. Or even better, if you do send out your own invoices, you can have banking and accounting email you a daily feed of all the ACH and wire payments that come in. And I showed, this is from their website. You can go on there, and they have the BAO is Banking and Accounting Operations mailman subscription. So you can subscribe to get daily ACHs, or they also have an unclaimed deposit list, which is kind of interesting. For GCA, I don't know that we use that all the time, but we sure use the ACH and wire payments. And what my team does is we keep a running total so that if we ever have to go looking for something, we have it all clumped together and make it easy. Okay. All right. I do see that there are questions, but I'm going to need some help, Susan.
We've got a couple of questions. First of all, you may want to clarify where to write the budget number, on the front of the check or the back.
Oh, great question. Actually, I would say on the front of the check or on the stub would be the most helpful.
And then we have a comment recommending adding the budget number and the short title as a cross-reference.
I love it all. Yes.
And then next question is, what happens to the checks after they arrive in Chicago? Does someone in Chicago deposit them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I kind of skipped all that, didn't I? So what it is that the lockbox is basically a service where they open up every single envelope, they scan every single check and piece of paper within that envelope, and sometimes they even scan the envelope, but they deposit all of the checks for us. So they are deposited immediately. I think everybody probably knows the UW has like a time frame that you have to deposit a check by. This is just, it's automatically done for you. And then GCA, the cash team, gets a list, and we also have access to the bank account where we can see the scans of everything, and we get a list of everything that's deposited each day. And that's how we are able to, that's the connection, is that the lockbox prepares basically the deposit for us and sends us the information directly to our cash team.
Okay.
That was maybe skimpy, but go ahead.
Okay. The other question we have is, where do we send refund checks from a vendor?
Well, if you get a refund check, and because it's just hard to know how they come into. So if it ends up in your office, you want to follow the cash transmittal process. And I have to say, I'm a little hazy on it. I have like a high level understanding of it, which I believe is you do a direct deposit, follow some, which GCA doesn't do, but I've seen that as the instruction. And then banking and accounting tells you, yes, we've got your deposit, and they're looking for the cash transmittal, which is the key piece that tells where this money belongs. And so that's part one. But I will also say that in the ACH lists that I've seen, I'm pretty sure I see vendor refunds in there. And those, you can do the same thing. That you know your money, or we know the money is here at the U, and you can identify that and let banking and accounting know and fill out that cash transmittal form. And I would say if all else fails, or the deposit ends up somewhere, or I guess it's a deposit, the incoming payment kind of ends going sideways or something, you can bring GCA help in, and we will bring in our specialists on the cash team. That's not their primary, like they are posting a lot of payments, but they're also very good about helping us. Like if we say that, hey, this is a you know, this is actually a vendor refund. Can you guys help us with that? And they have made exceptions for us. So, because we all want to get the money in the right spot. I hope that helped.
That looks like all the questions.
Okay. Ready for the next slide. I think it's.
Yeah.
Did you want to go over this RC request?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm so sorry. This is a special request to please do not send non-grant or contract payments to GCA. What ends up happening on those just as kind of is the team receives that and they're not really sure. So they will spend a lot of time trying to find a home for a payment that doesn't belong with us. Some common cross pollination places are like gifts. Those don't, even though that they come up kind of in our grant tracker, we don't manage those. Maybe student fiscal services. I think we get those. Co-motion. There's a lot of confusion. You know, we're sort of similar but different. So if you're unsure, you know what, give us a call. I was going to say, give us a call, send us an email and say, I have this, but I don't know where it goes. And, you know, my team, we always try to help.
I don't know if we need this. We kind of already, unless anyone else has any questions.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Don't see any others.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, I'm Susan Wilbanks, and I am going to talk about Biennium Crossover, which is coming up this summer, and its impact on grant budgets. Next slide. So to give just a basic overview, and I know that there's probably a lot of people here who've just been hired since the last Biennium Crossover, or I know it took me several bienniums to really gain some of this basic knowledge. So I'm just going to go over that first. A state of Washington biennium covers 2 fiscal years from the July of one odd year through the June of the next odd year. And this 2-year period includes 25 accounting months, which I know that math doesn't make sense, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. And bienniums are named for the year they begin. So we're currently in the end of the 2019 biennium, and then the 2021 biennium will start on the 1st of July. And so at the crossover, the expiring biennium's records are closed and a new set of records is open. And this primarily applies to state budgets and that portion of the funding, but the process impacts all UW budgets, including sponsored projects. And we've got a link here which will have more details, including key dates for transaction processing, and these slides will be on our website, so you can access this link from there. Next slide. So, month 25, 2 years, that's 24 months. How do we have a month 25? Well, the month 25 is basically where the old biennium is running in parallel to the new one. And this allows state agencies time to ensure that any trailing costs are posted to the biennium where they were incurred. And so what that means for us is that for most of July, charges will be posting to both the prior and the new biennium. The month 25 charges ultimately belong to June, and they are shown as June charges in MyFD, but they can post through most of July well after the normal month-end close, and you can see that by the transaction dates. And meanwhile, we'll have ordinary July expenditures that are already posting to month 1 of the new biennium. Next slide. So what does this have to do with grant budgets? The vast majority of grant budgets are not state of Washington. They end all different times, not necessarily June 30th. What does this have to do with us? Well, first thing is all budgets are going to look weird in MyFD during the transition period. There are various UW systems that may be temporarily unavailable as they're going through their updating process for the biennium. It could have an impact on deficit transfers. You will need to consider whether your transfer is going to go to the prior or the new biennium. And you'll also need to act fast if you are reporting non-FEC cost share transactions from a state budget. Next slide. So what does it mean that things are going to look weird? The main thing is that for several weeks during the transition period, your award amount will not show in MyFD's budget summary. It'll look like it's just disappeared. But you can still see it if you look in the Grant Tracker budget information page. The award is still there. It will be back in MyFD soon. Next slide. And you'll also see some transactions like this in your July transaction summary in MyFD. And you can just ignore them. They are system transactions related to the crossover, and they do not have any impact on your award amount or expenditures. Next slide. And for systems being unavailable, some of them will be down during parts of the crossover period. We've provided a link that should have these planned outages listed closer to the dates. And we recommend allowing extra time for all your budget management activities during the month of July. Next slide. Deficit transfers. Many of you, I know, use the deficit transfer tool on the Grant Tracker website. And if you're doing that in July, you'll want to check our website for the date that these transfers will switch from the 2019 to the 2021 biennium, if that makes a difference in when you're covering the deficit. And if you want to request a 2021 biennium transfer before that date, don't use the deficit transfer tool. Instead, you can email GCA help or submit a Grant Tracker request under the closing topic. Next slide. One of the biggest issues that we see going on that GCA has to manage during the biennium crossover is interim reports and invoices. If you have an interim report or invoice for a period ending June 30th, that's almost always going to be due before month 25 is complete. We'll be either sending those invoices around July 10th or sending the report sometime a bit later in the month, but regardless, before month 25 is complete. So we just have to set a date that will probably get most of those June transactions, and will not get very many Julys. We have to set a date that will sort of work with this nebulous crossover period. And so we will set a date in the first week of July. This hasn't yet been determined, the exact date. Watch our website. We'll have more information in the late spring. And so, for example, I believe last biennium, it was July the 6th. And so you'd send out a report that does not include month 25 charges, even though these will ultimately show as June charges in MyFD because they haven't posted yet, but it will include any very early July charges that post on or before that cutoff date, even though these will show as July charges in MyFD. So for example, if you're looking at monthly invoices, the invoices won't exactly match June or July, but if you add them together, they should match June and July added together. And if you have to provide your own backup to go along with the report or invoice, you will need to use those same dates. And you can access this information through the BI portal, which is decision support in MyFD's More Systems menu. Next slide. So here I just show where you can choose decision support from that dropdown. Next slide. And then you want to select variable reporting period transaction summary and click Run Report. Next slide. This will bring up a form where you can put in the dates, and this does have the 2019 dates, which you do June 2019, in this case will be 2021 next time, to get the full month that's already there. And then for the end date, you'll put in that exact July date. And you'll include the budget number. And assuming your sub-budgets are reported or invoiced along with the parent, which in most cases they are, you'll want to include children budgets. Next slide. So, non-FEC cost share. At the biennium crossover, once that happens, transactions that are on biennium-based budgets will no longer be available for tagging as non-FEC cost share. So if that's where you're planning to get your cost share from and you wait into the next month, it will be too late. So while we always encourage departments to report non-FEC cost share frequently, preferably at least quarterly, this limitation makes it especially critical in the time leading up to the crossover. Next slide. So how do you know if the budget you're trying to cost share from is a biennium budget? If you go into Grant Tracker and you look at the time period section, if the drop down has activity to date available, but biennium and fiscal year grayed out, that is a non-biennium budget, and it doesn't have that biennium closeout limitation. But if it allows you to choose biennium, that is a biennium budget. Next slide. So as a summary, review the biennium cutoff date calendar regularly as we come closer to the crossover. I'd recommend start looking in May. Mark key dates on your own calendar. If you need help, ask. Tag any cost share contributions as soon as possible, and be patient. By mid-August, everything will be back to normal. And we will, at our next forum, when we're closer to the actual crossover, we'll have some updates on the exact dates that will be involved. Next slide. So let's see, are there any questions in the chat? There was just one from the last part talking about college advancement teams help with depositing gift checks. But doesn't look like we have any biennium questions.
And I just want to pop in real quick. The system to see if you have a biennium budget is MyFD. I think is what you showed in your slide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle and I'm going to be talking about expense transfers, what they are, why we do them, and best practices. Next slide. So a quick overview of an expense transfer. So this is what we do to correct charges. It's how you move charges between budgets or to other object codes or project cost accounting codes. And you would submit a transfer if a charge intended for an award budget posted to an unrelated budget, or if a charge was unallowable on the award budget. And it could also be that the charge is allowable, but it posted under the wrong object code. So you might have a supply charge that posted under 03 where it should have been 05. And another instance is that the charge is allowable, but exceeds the allowed amount. So if the award, for example, only allows up to $1,000 in benefits and you post 1,200, you would need to transfer off that 200. You wouldn't submit an expense transfer if you're only trying to spend down the budget or park charges. Next slide. So the process for submitting an expense transfer, this is done through MyFD's expense transfer view. You will select the charges that need to be transferred, and then in the expense transfer form, you identify the budget or object code that the transfer needs to go to, and also enter the reason for the transfer. It's pretty straightforward system-wise, but with that said, there are things to consider when submitting a transfer. Next slide. So first, GIM 15. So this outlines the university's policy regarding the transfer of expenditures and states that expense transfers into an award budget need to happen within 90 days of discovering the error or 120 days of the original transaction date. So if you're submitting the transfer within 90 days, you'll need to provide a reason for the transfer and also indicate how the charge benefits the award. And if it's been 120 days or more, you also need to detail why the transfer is occurring so late, and ideally what measures the department is taking to identify and correct charges sooner. So a good question to ask yourself when you're entering the justification is, what would an auditor look for? And does the reason you enter explain why this transfer is necessary? Next slide. So other considerations are impacts to reporting. So first, effort reporting. If you're submitting salary transfers and you've already certified that salary for that particular cycle, then you need to recertify that effort, like either in effects or if it's non-faculty salary, then you need to note the changes on the GCCRs. And then there could also be impacts to invoices or financial reports. So if we've already issued the final invoice on a cost reimbursable award, and then there's an expense transfer, it basically means that we need to either revise the final invoice or issue a supplemental final invoice. Next slide. And on top of this, just generally speaking, large or frequent transfers are an audit risk. And to just insufficient reconciliation practices, or raise questions on award management. So moving on to the next slide, we have some suggestions for best practices. And the first one is knowing your award. So when you get your award, we recommend reviewing the sponsor's terms and conditions, just so you have a good understanding of what's allowable and not allowable. And here I have an example of a Cystic Fibrosis Foundation Award. And here they specify that you can't exceed the approved amounts. And if we were to, report like a greater stipend amount than what they approved, and then they would request us to revise the report. And then of course we'd have to, transfer off the overage as well. Next slide. The next suggestion would be regular reconciliation. So this is one way to hopefully reduce large or frequent expense transfers is by reviewing your transactions and budgets regularly so errors can be caught right away. And by transactions, what is being entered into rebar payment net, for example, like if you can enter the correct budget or object code at that stage, then hopefully they'll post correctly to the budget. And then, once they posted the budget, then check them again just to make sure that they're posting as expected and where they belong. Next slide. And then one more suggestion we have is that if you don't have your fully executed award yet, but the award's starting soon or just started, we suggest requesting an advanced budget so you can post the charges on their own budget as opposed to parking them elsewhere and having to do mass transfers later. Next slide. And then here I just have some resources to reference for like cost transfer guidelines and best practices. And then any questions?
Well, it looks like we had one more question come in about biennium crossover. What if the budget says biennium and activity to date? I would say go by the availability of biennium, but do make sure you're looking from the sort of regular budget summary or transaction summary menu. I've noticed sometimes that if I've just looked at encumbrances or done a transfer and just try to hit back, it will give me a biennium view, even if it's a grant budget. And we have a question, do we need to run a new GCCR report if there was a transfer after the period?
So I believe you don't need to run a new report. You just need to note the changes on the report that was already generated.
We've got, can we please share the slide with the resources one more time? Which these slides will be made available on the website. We will post the slides in the next couple days. And we also have a comment from Lisa and OPB. Look at the beginning and end dates of the budget. This will tell you if it's biennial. Okay, looks like that's all the questions.
Okay, so I'll be talking about indirect costs or IDC reconciliation. This is a pretty hefty topic, so bear with me. Let's see. All right, so as most expenditures post to the financial system, IDC should automatically post. There are times when IDC does not post correctly, in which case we would need to make an adjustment. This could be due to a system error, an update to the IDC rate or base, or in cases where the award has rules that our system cannot accommodate. There are two types of reconciliations, manual or automated. Typically, budgets go through an automated reconciliation, but there are a few situations where we would need to manually reconcile a budget. Some examples would be like an ad hoc department request, budgets with special IDC rules, and budgets with subcontracts and an IDC base that exempts some of these expenditures. So like modified total direct cost or base 18 is a pretty common base and is a good example of one with a subcontract IDC cap, since you're only allowed to charge IDC on the first $25,000 of each subcontract. You may receive a report that looks like this via Grant Tracker. This is generated by our system from an automated IDC adjustment. If an IDC discrepancy greater than $25 is found, a JV will automatically generate. A Grant Tracker note is sent to your department with the details. And you can see the calculated total IDC here. versus the actual total IDC, which is what had posted in MyFD, and then the IDC JV amount. And so that reflects the JV that was posted with this adjustment. And so in this case, the IDC base had changed, or it was updated. And so when GCA entered that new base into the financial system, the automated reconciliation occurred and discrepancy was found, and then the JV was posted and this report was sent out via grant tracker. So if the budget cannot go through the automated process, a manual reconciliation is performed, and we'll send our reconciliation workbook via grant tracker. If there are subcontract charges on the award, but the budget has rules around the exemption of subcontracts, we will provide an additional subcontract specific reconciliation. And if you're unfamiliar with these spreadsheets, they can be tricky to understand. So I'm hoping to clarify some things. So when you open the reconciliation file, it should open to the JV tab showing the JV detail. In this case, since the discrepancy was less than $25, GCA did not process an actual JV. Another tab in the workbook is the input tab. This is where we enter information about the budget and the exemption so we can calculate the correct amount of IDC. This is an example of a budget that's base 18. So the lists here show the categories that are exempt for that base. We use MyFD to pull our numbers for these reconciliations. And this tab also allows for us to account for multiple IDC rates throughout the duration of the award. So in this case, the rate was 55% through the end of April 2019. After that, it changed to 55.5%. So we have separate exemption sections for the different rates, which ensures that we are calculating the correct amount of direct costs that are subject to IDC for each rate period. So the worksheet tab is just an overview of the input screen, which shows the rate periods and the corresponding direct costs, exemptions, and IDC. You may remember me mentioning a subcontract specific workbook earlier. This is what GCA refers to as a BSC reconciliation. And the workbook is similar to the regular IDC workbook, but the worksheet tab is replaced with the BSC tab. So each subcontract has a column in the spreadsheet identifying some subcontractor information as well as the subcontract ID number. The IDC rate is listed, total amount of the subcontract, and the amount subject to IDC, and the exempt amount, which is based on the, sub-award amount or what's projected to award out. And so in this case, the base is 18. So the amount subject to IDC is capped at $25,000. Looking at the Seattle Children's subcontract specifically, if the $89,513 awarded is actually spent on the subcontract over the duration of the award, then $64,000 or $64,513 will be exempt. If you go down a little bit further in the spreadsheet, there's a total of the subcontract expenditures to date. And this is as of the JV date, the date we're processing this reconciliation. And if the budget is a standalone or in its first year, the sum of the subcontract expenditures to date over in the right column should equal the total 0362 charges in MyFD. Below that section, the remaining unspent subcontract balance is listed. For this example, the Seattle Children's subcontract in the first column has already been charged the full amount of IDC, so there is $0 remaining that would be subject to IDC. However, only 21,000-ish of the other subcontract in the middle column has been charged for subcontract expenses, so there's still 3,900-ish left that we can charge IDC on if that is spent on that subaward. In the next section, it's indirect costs applicable to subcontract. And you can see the IDC charged previously. So in the first subcontract, we charged the full amount all at once. And then the second subcontract, when we did the reconciliation, we did both at the same time. And we only charged $4,836 and change. And then we also have the JV date and JV number listed there. And then the IDC that needs to be charged on this new JV is shown in the JV amount this action period row. And the calculation of the IDC charge to date, including this new JV, is listed last. The last section is the BSC encumbrance reconciliation. So this is where we calculate the remaining amount expected to be charged after this JV, which we would use to update our BSC encumbrance in MyFD on this budget. And if the balance in the IDC balance to be charged row is $0 for a specific subcontract, then no additional JVs are anticipated for that subcontract. If the far right column of this line also shows $0, then you wouldn't expect to see another IDC adjustment for subcontract IDC posted to this budget unless you add additional subcontracts. The remaining tabs in the workbook are the transaction detail and list, which show the 0362 charges from MyFD broken down by subcontract. This is what we use to calculate the charges for our reconciliation. And then the saving and routing tab is for GCA use only. And another thing to add is our subcontract IDC reconciliations, the BSCs, we do them quarterly. So just to throw that out there. That was a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions?
We have one question. What about follow-on BSCs? I'm guessing that's when a subcontract carries through over multiple budgets.
Okay. Like over the years, like a renewal.
See renewals.
Yeah. So if it's the same subcontract, then it should only be charged. We should only charge IDC on the first $25,000, like of the whole thing. So if it's a subcontract that continues for multiple years and spans multiple budgets, then once we've charged on that first 25,000, we shouldn't charge anymore. So we shouldn't charge that on the continuation. And we'll, on our reconciliation, we should be accounting for that. So if like you're in year 2 of a 5-year award and we already charged the maximum amount on a subcontract in the first year, then you'll still see like our reconciliation that we send out will show the subcontract, but it'll show that it's already been fully charged. I hope that answers the question. I don't know. Any others?
Doesn't look like there's any others.
Okay, cool. Well, now I'm going to hand it off to Liz.
Hi, my name is Liz. Sorry, I was muted. I know we're running out of time, so I'll try and kind of make this quick. I'm just going to give you a brief GCA overview, kind of what our office looks like and how your grant kind of travels through our office throughout its life cycle. So next slide. If you look at the 2 charts here, you'll see that we're involved in the post-award processes. So award setup, management, which includes reporting and invoicing, and then closeout. Next slide. So what does GCA look like? We're a 40-person office that's split into 7 teams. If we break this down by beginning, middle, and end, budget setup team is in the beginning, reporting and invoicing man the middle part of it, and then our closing team steps in at the end to close out to status 4. For more complex items, we have a complex grants team. They handle the award from start to finish, just because there's more complicated reporting or invoicing requirements, which means that these budgets can't be part of our regular processes. And then the other 2 teams are the grant analyst team, which is us. So we're here to help support the rest of our office as well as campus. And we're kind of your main point of contact for GCA. So you'll see us frequently in our inbox, our GCA help email, and then answering a lot of those grant tracker requests. And then we have our management team. We've got 1 manager in each team. who help with daily activities. And then any escalated items will also go over to them for manager review. Next slide. So like I said, we're involved in the post-award fiscal management of things. There's a lot of things that happen in our office, but a quick high-level breakdown. So we receive the award from OSP, we process the funding action, reports and invoices get sent out. And then if there's cost share, we review and enter those cost share amounts. And then at the end, either your award will be extended or supplemented, or it will be ready for closeout. Next slide. Okay, so for our budget setup team, they're the first ones to touch the award. They essentially analyze and then comb through the award for any important details. Once the funding action has been processed, you guys should receive an email with an attachment. It notifies you that this has been completed. And just a note that we do include some important budget information in those attachments, so make sure to read through those. You can see that our budget setup team handles a bunch of other items, but they're the ones kind of processing all the post-award changes, the sub-budgets, and any type of new budgets that you need to request. And then next slide. Our invoicing team, they're responsible for sending out all of those invoices. They approximately send out about 2,200 invoices each month. 25% of those are manual submissions, so that could mean they have to be entered into the sponsor portal or put onto templates. And then our invoicing team is also responsible for working on any revised invoices that may come back, or they send out communication for milestone budgets. So if you have any milestone budgets, they're the ones following up on those deliverables. Next slide. And then our reporting team, they generate and submit the financial reports, which again is set up, award set up in the beginning. So it's important for timely and accurate reporting to maintain good relationships with us and the sponsor, as well as your departments. About 200 financial reports are submitted each month. 75 are actual manual submissions. And then just a note that these are different from your progress reports and your technical reports. GCA was only doing the financial report piece. And then they're also responsible for training grants. So during that training grant season, they will work with you to reconcile the stipend payments and any outstanding training obligations. Next slide. So for payments, so for invoice payments, these are not directly followed up by our office, but we do work closely with our cash team, ties those funds to the budgets, and then also follow up on open invoices once they have aged for 31 days. And then for cost share is set up in our system at the time of setup, but you guys are responsible for entering the FEC cost share and then notifying us of the non-FEC cost share so that we can get those entered for you. If we see any unmet cost share that's preventing an invoice or a report from going out, we will send you a grant tracker request to follow up. And then next slide. And then our closing teams. So closing team's goal is to close out budgets within 120 days of the budget end date. And in order to close out the things that you guys can do to help us is if you.
Hey, Liz.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Lily. Your audio dropped out on that last slide. Would you mind repeating what you said?
Oh yeah, so
Thank
sorry
you.
about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay, so our closing team, their goal is to close out budgets within 120 days of the end date.
Uh-oh.
All right. Well, maybe I'll just pick it up for you.
Yeah, or I
I'm
can
just
pick
gonna,
it up.
Oh, go ahead, Austin. Go ahead.
Okay, so Gym 39 says that we're responsible for closing budget status quo within 120 days of the award end date, as long as, you know, everything's in balance. And we also don't want to close a budget if the cost share commitment isn't met, and encumbrances should be cleared. Some additional responsibilities that our closing team takes care of are surplus transfers, deficits, refunds, and carryover, and also like the carry forward of cash. So ways that you can help GCA. So before you submit requests that require signatures or approvals, please make sure that you have those on your form or the email approval. Reconcile your budgets regularly, just to stay on top of things so that, you know, there aren't any surprise charges or credits after a final report or invoice has gone out. And then for cost share, we recommend that you submit non-FEC cost share quarterly at least. And then also, if you could look at your department's budgets in Grant Tracker and make sure that the campus contacts listed are up to date. This helps us because we use those contacts when reaching out via Grant Tracker and sometimes via email. So otherwise, we just rely on the EGC1, and sometimes those can be pretty old. And you know, you might have new staff in your department, and so we just want to make sure that our communication is getting to the right person. Please respond to our Grant Tracker requests in a timely manner. Know your final action date, and then notify GCA of any pending transactions or issues as soon as you become aware, especially when we're nearing the end of the budget and final invoices or reports are due. Any questions on closeout?
Let's see, just looking through here in the chat, had not a question, but a comment on indirects on subawards. They restart for each competitive cycle of an award. It's a good reminder. So if you have like a 5-year award, the subcontract IDC sort of calendar will run through that whole 5 years, but then if you get a renewal, it restarts and we charge IDC on the first 25,000 of the next competing segment. So let's see here, just going through all the comments. Is there a quick guide on updating department contacts? And it looks like Sally has pasted that. There is a place on our website. We'll make sure we get that out when we update the slides and post them. And we have, there is no place on the deficit transfer form to add backup, which is required in an audit. We have been sending the backup as a grant tracker. Any plans to update the deficit transfer form so we can add on notes or attachments?
No, not as of right now. I think that that's a good idea though. And I'll take note of that. I don't think we're working too much on updating Grant Tracker right now, just because we're unsure of, you know, what things are going to look like with finance transformation. But that's a good thing to call out. And maybe that's something that we can incorporate into whatever future system or anything we end up using in the future.
That definitely is something that we want to make sure is part of the finance transformation. So thank you guys. That's a really great suggestion.
And I think that's everything as far as questions and comments. And of course, you can always send us emails and grant trackers if you have further questions and comments.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for attending today. Yeah, like Susan said, if you have any questions or need guidance, you can contact us via grant tracker email or by leaving a voicemail. But just a reminder, please only pick one intake system per request.